Hi, folks. It's time for my yearly re-record. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often because my supporters deserve to be thanked, and I want to keep things more up to date going forward. First off, thank you for returning to the Whiskey Ring. If this is your first time here, or if you're a frequent listener, please take the moment to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you found the podcast. If you have suggestions for how to make the podcast better, or guests or topics you'd like to hear, please reach out to me at david@whiskeyinmyweddingring.com or via Facebook or Instagram. Second, I want to thank my vintage level sponsors, those at the highest level who keep this podcast going. Truly, without these supporters, I would have had to stop doing this a long time ago. Thank you specifically to Don, to John and Jim, Bill and Connor, Steve, Jake and Bill, Trevor, Michael and Jesse, Jared, Brendan and Larry, Logan, Patrick and Andrew, Dustin, Wade and Gavin, Daniel, and Justin. Thank you all for supporting, listening, telling your friends about this podcast. Cannot stress enough how much you all make this possible to go forward. If you haven't yet joined the Patreon, please consider doing so at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. You can support for as little as $5 a month, where you can have access to ad-free episodes, and will also have priority if a vintage spot becomes available. Those spots are strictly limited, so if a spot becomes available, you're going to want to be the first to know. Lastly, going forward, I am trying to be better about posting show notes for each episode on my website, whiskyinmyweddingring.com. These show notes will have links to websites and socials for my guests, and will also have additional information not in the interview, including reviews and tasting notes whenever possible or relevant. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to have you back as a listener next week. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. I'm going to admit I'm a little extra excited for this one. I'm talking to a true legend of the industry. I'm thrilled to welcome on Sukhinder Singh. Many of you may know him, may know his name from co-founding the Whisky Exchange, from running Whiskey Show London for many years, or any number of the projects you've undertaken before and since then, since leaving Whisky Exchange a few years ago. Today, you're about to begin production on Portintruan in Islay. Your team's own distiller is old enough to be called Whiskey at Tormore, and Elixir Trails is launched to explore more spirits. So a lot going on, a lot to talk about, and thrilled to have you on.
Thank you, David. Pleasure. Looking forward to it.
So this is a question I really don't ask very much, but given the number of projects you're part of, what does a day in the life of Sukhinder Singh look like now?
Look, it's very different. I think, look, liquid-wise, I'm doing less. It's my colleague Oliver Chilton, Ollie, who does a lot of that. And we work together on the newer projects, the bigger projects. But otherwise, day to day, like single cask selection and all, he knows what he's doing and he does a great job. When we're working on a specific project for a special event or a anniversary or a customer's anniversary, then we'll work on it together in terms of what are we going to do, how are we going to nurture our cask stock. Again, we sit down once a month, you could say. He's coming in this Thursday because he's moved to Scotland now. It was lovely having him in the office, and we were doing everything here. So, it's nice bouncing ideas and working together, but he has moved to Tormore. But he's now with the casks, he's with the stock. You can nurture it, you can look at it. So it's something he wanted to do. So it's been really good. But we get together, we try and get together once a month. He'll send me samples, we'll talk about it on the phone. So that side, as I said, less so. I'm spending more of my time doing NPD. I really enjoy that. Been part of the leading the team working on the new Tormore project. So we've just finished our design and packaging on Tormore. We are bottling very soon in the next few weeks and launching hopefully around the middle of next month. So, there's a lot of time has been spent on that. We've just had a meeting today talking about a relaunch event at the distillery. mainly for the local community. More, I know we're going to talk about some of this later, but I'm just going with the flow.
Sure.
Tormore was, originally built on community. And I think so because we're getting ready to launch, for us to do it amongst the local community around Tormore is quite important. So we're just doing it really for staff, local businesses, bars, restaurants, shops, fellow distillers in the area, and that's it. And then we'll do a little bit of press stuff, and then we'll over the next whatever 3 4 months, mainly from September onwards when the whiskey season starts and a lot of shows. There are a lot of shows around the world. We'll then gravitate towards a lot of advocacy. So I think the whole team is going to split up, and because the number of invites is just way too much. So we're going to split up and say, you do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, because everyone's really excited with what we've done. So that's Tormore. Excuse me. Doing a lot of work on Portintruan. I did a lot of work, especially early on, especially in terms of production. We had a core team, a small core team who led the design development of what the distillery was going to look like, feel like, the user journey, how visitors walk through it. And from my side, it was what I wanted to produce and how we could produce the several styles of spirit that I wanted to do. And there's a million ways to do it. You can go back to the basics and just keep it simple. A normal distillery will do quite a lot. And you can make flexibility, in fermentation and cut points, etc. And you'll get to a good place. But I think I wanted to go maybe one or two steps ahead of that and go back to the old days. So we had to do so much research. I didn't want to say that will do it. I wanted to prove to myself that this made sense. I mean, we could have done another two or three different things in addition to what we've done, but for me, those were the least important. And I think we have enough flexibility in what we're doing to be able to do whatever. So, as you can imagine, a lot of time's been spent on that. Now we're coming to the end. It's mainly the build and the kit out, and my brother's looking after most of that because this is something he really enjoys. Um, so I've left it to him. And now I'm spending my life doing a lot more in terms of sales. So before we had smaller brands, Single Malts of Scotland, Port Askaig, Elements of Islay, Black Tot Rum. And for us, now that we're launching Tormore, which is a serious, in many ways, a serious player, when you look at Tormore, you have to understand that it's a 5 million litre a year distillery, maximum capacity, which means it's pretty damn big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's big.
So we are fortunate that we purchased a fair bit of stock with the distillery. So, we've been working on what to do, but now it's really, we got to make sure we have the right partners to work with around the world. So I'm spending a lot of time traveling, meeting distributors, importers, deciding who's, the right partner for us for the long term, who has a bigger reach. In some markets, we're splitting our brands because some of our brands may be a little bit more geekier. Some of our brands are a bit more, I wouldn't say mainstream, but much more volume. So every market is different. So I'm really enjoying that, and at the same time doing a bit of ambassadorial work, classes, etc. So when we met in New York, that was exactly what I'm part of, similar to what I've been doing. I'm off to Asia again next week for 10 days, coming back, then Islay Festival, because we're getting so close to launching, opening Portintruan. There seems to be a nice excitement and buzz. So I've been said you have to come. We're doing a tasting in our new warehouse, which is empty, I think for about 70, 80 people. So that's going to be fun. And there's six of us who are going to do the tasting, and we're all going to talk about different elements of the vision behind what we're doing, why we're doing it, a bit about the team, a bit about the flavors of what we're trying to create. So yeah, a lot of my time, that's what I do.
And as you mentioned, we met at the Manhattan Whiskey Club. So thank you to Kurt Maitland, mutual friend, for making this introduction. I don't want to spend too much time on kind of the background, because there is so much to talk about looking forward. But there was well, first I'll ask a question based on something you said at that Manhattan Whiskey Club event, which was that you said whiskey is, to you, it's the most complex, honest spirit. You've also championed rum, tequila, number of other spirits over the years. For you, if you had to give kind of an elevator pitch to someone trying a new spirit, why do you think, what sets whiskey apart as that complex, honest spirit? And does it apply to all types of whiskey?
So I think, look, you compare it to all other spirits, it's by far the most complex. One distillery can create so many different profiles, and the reason single malt and Scotch has been such a success is because all these different distilleries around Scotland, some of them actually the equipment looks exactly the same. Even, the pot stills look very similar, the washbacks are the same, but they produce completely different types of spirit. And of course, then you age them and you'll get something completely different. Everyone's wood regime is different, everyone's spirit regime is different. It's the type of barley they use, etc. But it's definitely the most complex. Every, excuse me. When I started in the business, I was told, that whiskey is special because every time you go back to it, you find new flavors, And I was dying to experience that. I wasn't really big into drinking. I was more into collecting at the time. So when I started my journey, the first bottle I ever opened, I tried lots of stuff, but I never experienced drinking one bottle and just going through it over time at different times of day, different temperatures. One day is warm, one day is a bit cooler, and see how the whiskey also opens up in the bottle with a little bit of air through oxidization. And that blew my mind. And the first bottle I ever opened was actually a Springbank 21-year-old in the dumpy bottle from the 80s. And I had heard it was a really good whiskey. Excuse me, sorry. I had heard it's a very good whiskey, and I thought, okay, I'm curious. I can try. I said I tried all the standard malts, but a dram at a time. But to experience something from the whole bottle, it was just incredible, absolutely incredible. So, I've crossed over into other spirits, into world whiskey and everything. I think, look, the Japanese started making whiskey 100 years ago. Yeah, they copied what the Scots did. But actually, in the beginning, what they produced wasn't amazing. It was okay. And the reason, and it wasn't amazing, and that's why they used to add mix with Scotch. Or a lot of the Japanese whiskies were a mix of Japan and Scotland. Um, Bourbon, very different profile, as you know. It's new oak, so it's big, heavy profile. Irish, the single malt's not bad. Blends, okay. But it's a different style again, Irish whiskey. Scotch became the pinnacle. When you compare it to cognac, cognac is very simple. It's fruity, it's simple, it's elegant, and I don't find it complex. I love the flavors of cognac, but I do not find it complex. I find it quite the flavors are quite narrow. And it's the same with every other category. Rum, I think, is a bit more interesting and a bit different. You can find an array of flavors. You've got, the big, heavy Demerara rums from Guyana. You've got some of the high ester rums from Jamaica. Very interesting. But again, still, flavor profiles are quite refined. They're big flavors, but they're not complex as such, what like whiskey is. So I just gravitated toward whiskey because I just found it so much more interesting and so much more enjoyable. And going back to the same whiskey in a few days' time, or with somebody different, or in the evening when you're in a good mood or you're in a bad mood, and it always delicious, but you pick up different flavors. And it just blew my mind. It's just, and I still get that. I just still look for that when I'm drinking whiskey, even for pleasure, it's still a bit of work because I'm sort of thinking, when's the last time I tried this dram? What did it taste like? And what's different about when I'm tasting it today compared to when I tasted it last time? And it tastes different in the US and it tastes different in Scotland. It just does, and in England. And part of that is also the climate, the local climate. You know, I did a tasting in a couple of places in the US, and the venue was very, very warm. So what I did was I bought the whiskies that I was going to show in an ice bucket in cold water just to chill them down, because otherwise, for me, they would have been a bit cloying. You with me? So I just wanted to chill them down to get them to basically how they should be drunk when you're in Scotland, for example. That for me is just perfect, absolutely perfect. So I think that's where, for me, whiskey was really special. One, in terms of complexity and the type of flavors. And complexity, when I'm saying complexity, you can still have elegance and complexity, as well as big flavors and complexity. Yeah. Um, and in those days, a lot of the whiskies, or virtually everything, had an age statement, and no other spirit did that. That's where I'm talking about honesty and transparency. You with me? Things have changed a little now because there's a lot of no age scotches, of course. But the cognac is struggling. It's really struggling, and it's been through ups and downs. And I think part of that is because people genuinely don't know what they're drinking. I really do. Same with rum. Yeah, rum. You haven't got a clue when you look at a bottle. Is it elegant and fruity? Is it high ester? Is it sugared? Is it spiced? What style is it when you just look at a bottle? It's actually very difficult to tell. So I think people with scotch, single malt and scotch and blends, whatever, they know what they're getting. It's not too difficult. I think everyone's learned if it says Isla, watch out, because it might be peaty or it should be peaty. So I think that's where, in some ways, the lesser PT Isla brands have, I wouldn't have say struggled because they're doing really well. I love Bunnahabhain and it's found its following. But for a new consumer, when you see Isla, it puts you off because when customers say to me, I don't like Isla whiskey. I ask them, well, have you tried Bruichladdich? No, it's Isla whiskey. Have you tried Bunnahabhain? No, it's Isla whiskey. And when they try it, they're like pleasantly surprised. And for me, it's a beautiful first step into Isla if you don't like Isla, because Bunna, the peat is so gentle. Make sense? And that's how I got into it. Someone fooled me. Um, in my early days, I went to Isla and I went to the bar in the evening and I go, "Do you have any Speyside whiskies?" And he looked at me really angrily, but he was patient. He goes, "I'm sorry, no, I don't." Because what's wrong with Isla whiskey? I go, "No, no, nothing's wrong with Isla whiskey. It's just I'm not used to it. I find it a bit strong." He goes, "Sit down and shut up." And he gave me a whiskey blind, and I had it, and I was like, "This is amazing. This is not Isla whiskey." He goes, "Yes, it is." So, so I think that's where Scotch for me, single malt. is really, really special. And I think the other reason it's special, David, is because again it's changed a little now, but for my first 25 years of doing whiskey, every brand spoke about single malt as a category rather than as a brand. You with me? So because the sales weren't high, they wanted to promote Scotch. Everyone appreciated each other's brands, and everyone said, you know what, we taste like this, and our neighbors taste like that, and up the road tastes like this, and down the road tastes like this. And it was brilliant. And for me, whiskey was so united. And I think in some parts it still is. I think the big guys have possibly, I wouldn't say lost the plot, but lost the plot because they want to create brands and make the brand more powerful than the category, so that, this is who we are. This is our brand. It doesn't, each statement doesn't matter. We are so powerful. And I think that yeah, the brand is powerful, but in some cases, I think I miss that where everyone speaks. When I talk about whiskey today, I always talk about it as cross category, always.
So, one more question before you, in your background, before we go into the collecting questions. You said, I'm paraphrasing your words a little bit here, but you said at that Manhattan event, you're an Indian kid who found something he loved and dove headfirst into it. The shop owned by your parents, the Nest, was the first South Asian owned whiskey shop or spirit shop, even. So in London or
In London.
in London. So in my limited experience and limited knowledge of this, being of Indian descent and South Asian descent and growing up in the UK isn't like necessarily the foremost identifier. It's not what people who have spoken about you or with you are like, oh yeah, he's Indian, he's South Asian. It's just he is a knowledge base. He's experienced with old and rare and with these projects. I'm asking this because I'm just curious. Have you ever felt pressure to represent the South Asian whiskey community or population in whiskey circles?
Are you talking about the South Asian whiskey brands?
So in a way, because I'm thinking more so from the drinking side. Just say I'm of South Asian descent and I drink, but I think part of the reason I asked is because most of the representation I see is in relation to Indian whiskey brands, rather than being about whiskey as a whole or separate from them.
Okay, so I think, look, growing up, I was a very quiet kid and I just wanted to learn. I was just hungry to learn. So I just listened, learned, went, traveled to Scotland, did a lot of research. There was not many places in London. There was nowhere to go. I had no one to share my hobby with. Yeah, so it was actually very difficult. I found friends abroad who I initially, some of them, I started off swapping and buying and selling miniatures with, but they had a knowledge of whiskey, so I learned from them. Then, as I said, I met John Milroy, the famous owner of Milroy's of Soho. And he was one of my key inspirations because he was London based. He was the only person in London doing whiskey full time. And he was one of the first early pioneers. Both John and his brother Wallace wrote the books and did the classes. John was more of a businessman and ran the shop and drank a lot of wine. Uh, and so for me, I learned a lot from them. I used to go once every month to London just to go and see them. And Jack sort of took me under his John also called Jack, so I'm calling him Jack because I usually call him Jack. Jack took me under his wing to a certain. He was so impressed, and so excited that he found someone in London who was actually that interested in whiskey, because actually a lot of their customers were from abroad. Their big important customers were actually from abroad. There were local people who liked whiskey, but they would just come buy a bottle and all, but they never talked about it. They were never excited as such. That for me was a really good learning ground. Then, of course, as we proved ourselves in business, I could sort of demand what I wanted, because we proved ourselves. I got the allocations, what I needed. But remember, there were not many players in those days as well. Make sense? Um, and I think one thing through my journey, which probably upset me a lot, was shocked me a lot, was that every country of the world, big important country of the world, had a spirit brand that was world famous. Scotland was famous for whiskey, England, you could say possibly gin, France, of course, wines, Cointreau, Grand Marnier, cognac, champagne, Italy, wines, some important liqueurs, vermouth, etc. And India was one of the biggest whiskey consuming nations of the world. And all the Indian whiskey was pretty awful. Everything I tried was pretty awful and really upset me. And the other thing which also got me was it was a huge rum market. Yeah. And I also realized that it was one of the biggest sugarcane producing countries of the world. Yeah. And they should have an amazing rum, or they should have millions of amazing rum brands, but they didn't. There was one brand as such which I really liked, and still around, of course, called Old Monk, which I believed had the potential to become a pretty big global brand. But unfortunately, it was a lot of internal family politics and the way they franchised their brand out that unfortunately I guess it wasn't going to happen. And I know a number of big distillers looked at it and realized they couldn't do anything with it. Later, when the first company to approach me for Indian whiskey was, of course, Amrut. So their export director, now whiskey maker, Ashok. So Ashok actually studied in Newcastle and then stayed on to set up this whiskey company with his friend whose family owned the distillery in Bangalore. And so Ashok came to see me. I was one of the first people he came to see. And he showed me that they were about to launch an Indian single malt. And I was like, okay. And then I tried it and it blew me away. And I was just so happy and so excited that, someone's doing something. Unfortunately, his idea in terms of what he wanted to do, how he wanted to launch it in the UK, I didn't fully agree with because he felt that his target audience should be Indian restaurants because there was thousands, tens of thousands of Indian restaurants in the UK. It was the curry capital of the world. And I go, look, Indians love whiskey, but they want to drink scotch. They're not going to drink Indian whiskey. And that's exactly what happened. After 2 years, he goes, Skinner, you were completely right. I'm now going to talk to the real whiskey people, the people who love single malt from Scotland, and I'm going to do that. And he did it really well and really successfully. I mean, one thing I remember was, of course, he tried to do tastings, and nobody wanted to come to an Indian whiskey tasting because no one knew what the heck Indian whiskey was. And remember, this is really early on. Japanese had just started, so still early doors, and people were, just some people were up to trying Japanese, but Indian,
We're talking just to jump in. We're talking early 2000s
we
ish
are,
at
yeah,
that point.
probably.
Yeah,
Give me a second. 20.
2004. I
Yeah,
want to say
2000.
was
Correct,
yeah,
absolutely right. Yeah, because they're just celebrating their 20th anniversary. So yeah, you're right.
right. Yeah,
Um, and what he had to do was do blind tastings with Scotch, yeah, and put in a couple of Amruts. And he said, let's try. And they're all big brands. And he was like, let's go through these whiskies. We've got 4 single malts from Scotland, 2 single malts from India. let's see how they taste, and you tell me what's what. And the best two were Amrut, so he did a great job, an absolute superb job of how he did it. So it makes me really happy that, it started. Then you've got other brands which followed. And to be fair, everything pretty much is good. The only two brands I don't love that much actually belong to the two biggest distillers, Diageo and Pernod. Yeah, who should be the best because they've got all the experience in the world, but they're not my style of whiskies. I don't love them. I think the smaller guys are doing a much better job. I don't know if that sort of answers your question.
In a way, yeah, it for sure. If in fairness, it's a tough question too because it's representation is always a tough question.
Yeah, I know.
But it
Sorry,
does
the other thing I
provide.
have to say is because,
Yeah.
the Asian market is big, especially Indian market, which hasn't fully opened up to single malt because of the crazy taxes and the really difficult state regimes. It's like, again, it's like America selling to 52 countries or whatever. This is like selling to whatever, how many states there are. It's a nightmare. It's so complicated. But I'm actually quite excited because with, especially now that we're launching Tormore, to actually step into India and try and do more about whiskey. And I think that needs to be done from the bottom up in terms of, cross category trainings to show where our single malt sits against other people, for example. So I'm quite excited about that. We're just looking at who to partner with, what to do, how to do it. But yeah, let's see what happens. Hopefully early next year.
So my next question or two is going to be about your collecting. So the first old and rare you ever got, if I'm right, was a mini of Kirklandton. It's a closed
Bottle,
distillery. It was
bottle.
bottle. Okay. So this was a closed distillery from the turn of the 20th century. It closed, I think, around just before American Prohibition,
Yeah, probably
something like that.
1920s, I think, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So in from there, you said you were more focused on collecting at first than necessarily drinking, but building on the knowledge you were getting from visiting and from reading, and um, you just said you didn't really meet many other collectors, whether be they minis or full bottles, until several years later. Um, and was that? I guess my first question was that kind of a function of there just weren't that many, like you said, there weren't that many in the UK, and it's not as easy to communicate as it's today with the internet. Makes it sound like you're going back to the Stone Ages, but that's not what I mean. Um, that there were just more spread out, or was it that there just weren't that many collectors? Period.
I think, David, there must have been collectors because, over the last, whatever, 35 years, I have bought some lovely collections in the UK. And it was like, wow, where did this come from? Some of them I was lucky to find, some of them came to me. Um, I think in the early days, it was purely what you're saying. It's how did you find people? There were no clubs. Do you see my
Yeah.
point? So I didn't
Hmm.
know where to go. I asked John Milroy if he knew any club. No. Do you organize tastings? Not really. He goes, I'll do a tasting with you. We can sit down and have a laugh. But that was as good as it was. So I just didn't know anyone. Honestly, I just didn't. I think miniatures was easier. When I was collecting miniatures, that's when I actually started drinking. And then when I started collecting big bottles, I sort of knew where my head was and what I wanted to do. Um, but I'd been thinking about collecting bottles for a while because I wouldn't say I was getting bored of miniatures, but I was finding less and less. And there was a lot of miniatures from the independents were being made for the collector, which I didn't like. You with me? I wanted genuine miniatures, which were made as samples of a big bottle, etc. That interested me much more. And because that had slowed down, miniatures became quite unsexy. I sort of gravitated and started researching more on bottles. And always through my journey of collecting miniatures, I always sort of, try and find that, okay, this is the miniature, there must be a big bottle equivalent of it. You with me?
Mm. Yeah.
And so it sort of made sense. And some of them I could find pictures of here, there, and everywhere. So it was really interesting for me. And then sort of I knew what I was doing. By the time I started collecting, I was just sort of waiting for the right thing to happen. And that bottle of Kurt Liston sort of just set it up for me, because it was like I knew lost distilleries. I'd seen a couple of old bottles. And I just was waiting, when should I start? What should I do? And when this bottle of Kirk Liston came along, it was just like, this is so special. I have to have this. And as I said, it took me an hour of haggling with this guy to be able to get it. And he was very reluctant, but in the end, he was like, fine, fine. I think, this probably be better off in your hands than it is mine. So, yeah, that's really how it sort of started.
Well, I have a follow up if it helps.
Yeah, again, what?
So my follow is in recounting starting the collection. You noted that in the 80s and 90s, in particular, the collectors that you knew about, at least, were mostly in Italy.
Correct.
Some in Germany, but that was more of a drinking culture as
Correct.
opposed to a collecting. I'm just curious. I think it's the second time that I've heard this. Was there a reason that Italy, rather than even Scotland itself or the U.S., was a hub of whiskey collecting?
So I don't know. I think I just look at it. Of course, initially it started off as um, they liked fine things. If you look at, really classy people, you find them in French and in Italy. This is what I believe. Yeah, the best fashion designers, the best of the best. Watchmakers, Switzerland, fine. But the people who bought all this stuff were from that neck of the woods. Yeah, I mean, you've heard from Italy, La Dolce Vita, it was about the fine things in life. Yeah, they wanted best cars, best watches, the best wine. Yeah, and I think they naturally sort of elevated to fine spirits. They bought cognac as well. They bought, other grappa, this, that, but I think they also realized the finest spirit on the market was whiskey. And I think there were some early pioneers who who bothered to travel to Scotland to experience it, understand it. And when they knocked on, no distilleries were open in those days, virtually. So they just sort of were driving past and knocked on the door and said, could we have a look around? Wow, yeah, sure. Could we try some stuff from the casks? Oh, yeah, sure. And it's like, this is really good. Can we buy a couple of casks, or will you do a bottling for us? And they go, well, we don't really bottle. We usually, sell our stock for blending, But he goes, well, I'll buy 2,000 bottles. It's like, what? 2,000 bottles? We can't even sell a cask of whiskey of, 250 bottles. You want to buy 2,000 bottles? I'll buy 2,000 bottles. This is really good, And it was just crazy. They bought it. And then I think within Italy, they were literally traveling salesmen. They took samples to really classy people, to really wealthy people, and said, we have bottled this fine whiskey, try it. And the guys would try it and say, this is really good. So they wouldn't say, give me a bottle. They would say, I'll take 10 cases. Well, I'll take 20 cases, because they all had cellars. Yeah, they all had cellars. I think the other thing is, from what I know, this is what I've heard from friends, in the old days, the whole of Italy was on cash. So a lot of people had so much cash money. They never paid taxes. They never did everything. All business was done on cash. So they had so much cash. And of course, if you have cash, it doesn't grow. So they bought antiques and cars and wine, anything they could find, which they felt would appreciate. That's why they bought cases and cases of whiskey, put them in their cellars, and forgot about it, and then drank a bottle or two, but actually just forgot about them. And then when whiskey started becoming popular, they were like, well, or, they're getting old and they need to sell on. They would then just, say, okay, I have all this stock for sale. David, you would not believe, about 15 to 20 years ago, I went to see two people. Yeah. One of them was in Italy, and the owner had a restaurant, one of the finest restaurants in Bologna, around Bologna. And we went to eat there. Plus, the reason my friend took me was because he had an amazing stock of whiskey. And I was like, okay. And we met because he knew the owner and the chef and his wife. You know, the guy came to the table, he sat with us, he ate with us, he was cheerful. So we had a lovely, lovely meal. Honestly, I was so intrigued. One of the dishes was this pasta dish with the pastas were filled, and they were that small. They were tiny little balls, yeah. And we had like this soup, and there must have been 200 of these little pasta things in the soup. And I go, "Are these handmade?" He goes, "Yes." I go, "What? They're tiny. How many do you make?" And everyone's drinking this soup. He goes, "Come to the kitchen." And he showed us. He had a team just doing this little thing. And we're just like, this is incredible. Amazing meal. Anyway, we finished the meal, and his restaurant was in this beautiful old building with a courtyard in the middle. And so you could, being like a square with a courtyard in the middle, it had four parts to the building, four buildings joined together. In one building, you had the restaurant. So he took us and he goes, "Come, let me show you around." We went into building number two. Yeah. It was just full of wine from top to bottom. And I was like, wow, it was so impressive, right? Then we went to the next building, building number three. It was full of Ferraris. Then we went to building number four. It was full of whiskey, cases and cases. He had like 10 cases of one, 20 cases of another, five cases of another. The best thing. And so he had decided he wanted to sell it. Why did he want to sell it? Because he had no children and he wanted to retire. And he was just like, I might as well just retire, take the money, and just enjoy it for the rest of my life. That is a prime example of what happened. You with me? And it was just so many. The biggest difference I find, or I always found, with buying whiskey in Italy versus buying whiskey anywhere in the world, anywhere in the world, I would find a bottle of each. In Italy, I would find cases, cases. And a lot of this whiskey was purely bottled for the Italian market because they had a lot of disposable income and they wanted to invest that money in whatever. You know, as long as it was something good, they had good refined palates. They tried the whiskey first and said, "This is very good. Okay, I will buy 10 cases, 20 cases, 50 cases, whatever." It was incredible.
I just want to know before I ask my next question. We're almost at about half time now, and I have about 3.5 pages of questions. We've only gotten to page one so far, but I'm
Carry
gonna
on.
push forward. Uh, but no, this is so much fun because I like, especially when I have someone like you, and this is a side note, who has touched so many aspects of the industry. It I love hearing the stories and how things just evolve and go through. So, um, my I guess my last question on collecting is, you've said you have two collections really. You've got the drinking collection and the museum collection, and that the museum collection is, we're talking over 10,000 bottles.
Yeah, just under. Yeah.
Yeah. So on one hand, I mean, you just have to look at that and be like, that's damn impressive. On the other, a couple questions comes to mind, but it's really, you're also someone who really believes that whiskey is for drinking. Um, so for you, what differentiates something going into the drinking collection versus the museum collection?
I think, look, most of the bottles in my museum collection probably predate to 2000. Okay. Most of them, I would say 98% of what I have in that collection is pre 2000. Okay. I've got some new stuff because it sort of fits my collecting profile. For example, I've always loved Old Bilmore, so I just buy Old Bilmore as long as it's good. I used to collect a lot of Macallan. It just got out of hand, so I stopped. Um, so if it fits in, I buy it. Yeah. Uh, with the drinking collection, and it's literally anything which is predominantly a distillery bottling or a really special drinking whiskey. So that's my museum collection. Then I've got a second collection where, as you can imagine, I've tried so much over the last 35, 38 years, um, that, you know, in the beginning when I used to try these whiskeys, I knew they were special, but only, later down the line when you try more and more and more that you realize how special they were. So sometimes I go back, and if I get an opportunity to buy a second bottle or a third bottle or a fourth bottle, I buy it. Yeah. I've got, honestly, too much stock. I really have. Some will say you're a bit greedy or a bit crazy or whatever. I think I always had a vision or a dream to open a whiskey bar. So a lot of this stuff which I bought as part of the drinking collection was that I would open it in a whiskey bar, yeah, and share my knowledge and share these most amazing drams and bottles. Some of them are one-off. Some of them, there's only two or three that have ever turned up, and I've got one in my collection, my museum collection, so I don't need a second. The second one I would love to try a lot of them. Some I've tried, most of them I've tried, but there's a lot I haven't tried because they're just not that easy to find, or people don't look at them. Everyone talks about, the big famous distilleries, oh, this Glenfarclas and this Macallan and this Springbank and all the rest of it. No one talks about Tormore or Glencadam or, you know, Glenougie or Conville Malt because there's hardly anything to try, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Tamnavulin. There are so many amazing whiskies, even from the distilleries, which you could argue are not that important or have not really been at the forefront of single malt. Some of the brands now are pushing, but I think where some companies have three or four different distilleries, they then prioritize and say, you know what, this is our premium, this is our fighter, middle range, this is our mainstream. We're going to put it into supermarkets. You understand? Because we can't make everything premium and all. And some of those, single malts, you look at them and you try them and they go, this is too good to be a basic entry level malt which has been killed on price. One of those malts I talk about often is Ardmore. Yeah, I really think Ardmore is a great single malt, but in the UK, it's a supermarket brand. It's just available as a no-age supermarket brand, and it's as cheap as chips. It's so cheap. Whereas actually, we bottle independent. We bottle. I've got loads of casks of Ardmore. We bottle it, and we love it. Do you see my point? So there are so many malts which a lot of people wouldn't even look at, give two ticks to. Whereas I've tried such amazing bottlings of them, and I've got two or three, you know. So that's really how my drinking collection happened. I just have too much stock. I've been going through it actually recently because I'm like, I'm running out of space, and I could do with a bit of money because all I'm doing is spending. I'm building a distillery. I'm sort of trying to build Tormore as a brand, but we haven't sold a single drop of liquid yet. Since we bought it 3.5 years ago, it's a big commitment. Just keep distilling, keep recasking, keep nurturing, and don't have a single penny coming. It's a lot of work. It's a big sacrifice, but we wanted to do it in the right way. So I'm actually thinking about selling some of my stock because, yeah, I could do with the money. I need the money.
Hey, fair enough. Fair enough. I actually think that's a good segue into Tormore because Tormore is one of those distilleries that, to your point, it goes under the radar, or it
Yeah,
did go under the radar, as it was built for to make single malt, but to make single malt for blends.
yeah.
And
It actually wasn't, David. It actually wasn't. Let me stop you quickly. It was actually designed as a distillery to make single malt for single malt whiskey. Yeah, it was never designed to make blends. It just happened that it's had such an interesting past that soon after ownership, I don't know what happened, but they decided to sell it and they sold it to someone else. They didn't get a chance to really launch a single malt. They sold it to someone else, and then this other company was, they were planning and doing some. They just started bottling, and then it was sold to someone else. And then eventually ended up with Pernod Ricard, and Pernod Ricard already had, a dozen or so distilleries, and of course you can't sell everything, you know. Hence the reason you never see Brazier Glenlivet, you never see Alta Bain, you virtually never see Scapa. They even killed Strathyla because it was too important for Shivers. There's so many. Milton Duff is an amazing distillery. You don't see it. So it became part of that stable and got lost. And occasionally, when they needed a product or a brand for a supermarket in France because it was French ownership, they thought, oh, we got some Tormore, we got loads of Tormore, let's bottle a little bit of Tormore. So, but just to correct you, it was actually designed for single malt production.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're right. And to clarify, what I was thinking was more that it was because of who built it, Shenley in the 50s. It was one of those distilleries that, at least in more recent history, it might have a couple of releases, as you said, in France, each state of releases. But really, other than that, if you wanted to find Tormore, you needed independent bottlers.
Yeah.
If you wanted any sense to try their old stock, young stock, whatever it was, everything else was going into blends.
Correct.
Today. And there are a number of distilleries, such as the ones you just mentioned, that are even ones like Kalila that are gaining more notoriety now because of independent bottlers and a couple of their own releases, but otherwise can be these massive, Tormore's 5 million liters a year, massive production, but we don't see it as consumers yet. But this is changing now with the regime you've brought in. So
absolutely. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what happened. And I think, looking back, it's like every single malt distillery, they've had their good days and their bad days. They had upturns, they had downturns, there were economic things, there was, political things internally within the companies. So there's good and bad. You'll find periods where the whiskey production wasn't as good as it should have been, and sometimes it's not the spirit, it's the type, it's the cask they put their whiskey into. Because, for example, if you go back to the 80s, where there was Whiskey Lake, and in 84 they closed a lot of the distilleries closed, a number of their production plants, a number of, sorry, not distillers, number of distillers or whiskey companies closed a number of their distilleries because they just thought, we've got too many distilleries, yeah, and these are smaller, or they're in the wrong location, they're inefficient, or they're not picturesque like maybe a whiskey distillery should be, and they close them for, the reasons they thought fit. Interestingly, they never looked at it to see, did it produce a good whiskey versus a big efficient plant which might not have produced a good whiskey. So as I said, back in the 80s, early 80s, because there was so much whiskey, they weren't selling enough, similar to something like right now. They started reusing their old wood because they didn't have money to buy new wood. You with me? So they started using old wood, which normally they would have disposed of. So when you go and try whiskey in the early 90s, your 10-year-old, 12-year-olds in the 90s, a lot of them are not very good. Single malts in the 80s were really good. In the early 90s, hit or miss. And then it took another 10 years for me to get back. So for me, 90s was not the, I would say, not the greatest time for the big brands. Yeah. But to be fair, I was drinking a lot of independent bottlings during those days. That was the time, that was my heyday, if you see what I mean. But that's what happened. Now, if we look back at Tormore, yeah, it was built in 59. Um, and initially, when they opened, they actually opened the distillery with stainless steel condensers. And my understanding is they ran the distillery for maybe a year and they realized this is not working. It's not producing a good spirit. So then they changed them back to copper, or back to being traditionally back to copper. And then I believe it produced an amazing spirit. So there's one legendary bottling of Tormore, or two. One is the Tormore 1966 Samaroli, matured in sherry cask. It's absolutely stunning. Stunning. Yeah. Then I have not tried much in the early 70s, I'll be honest. Late 70s and 80s. And for me, from late 70s till mid 80s, I don't think they did a good job. And again, I'm not sure if it was spirit or wood, but I don't love it. Yeah. But from the late 80s, it becomes really good again. Yeah. Really good. And in the 90s, it's lovely. But they change things. And usually the biggest change in a distillery where the new make can change is upgrades when they put in more washbacks. Sometimes they change the mash tun because they need a bigger one, but sometimes the mash tun is big enough, but actually they don't have enough washbacks. So what happened with Tormore was that their first upgrade, yeah, was they built a second tun room just outside the main distillery in the courtyard, in the big courtyard in the back. And they built it on top of the boiler house. Okay. So this tun room is so warm because of the heat from the boiler. And I don't think they insulated it properly. So you get a completely different type of wort here than you do in the main still house, which has got a number of big washbacks. And then the third upgrade, they needed more washbacks, so they put them in the clock tower, which is very cool because it's a stone building, yeah, concrete floor, so it's really cool. So when you try the whiskey production, the spirit or aged whiskey from the three eras between where these upgrades happen, all three are Tormore, but they have slight nuances. Yeah. So the first one, um, because it was purely in the Stella, which was also warm, um, is slightly cereally. Yeah. The second one is slightly fruitier because even though they had the boiler underneath and it was warm, they pitched yeast at a different temperature. Yeah, to make sure it worked. And then when they built the third extension, they mixed all the spirits together, yeah, all the wood together for distillation. And what you found was because it was cooler there, it actually made a more fruitier spirit.
Mhm.
With me?
Yeah.
So that is Tormore, and that's what actually excites us. Look, it's a great place. I said before that the reason I purchased Tormore was predominantly one reason. Yeah. I would never have bought a distillery if I didn't believe in the spirit. Because for me, everything's about liquid, liquid, liquid. Yeah. For us, we liked the liquid. It was just the fact that most of the liquid was in, very old refill wood because it was for blending. It was not designed at that stage. They were not making it for single malt. They were making it for blend. And but we knew the spirit quality was amazing. The cast was not bad. They just needed to be brought back to life a little bit. Um, we were lucky that it was one of the most prettiest distilleries in Scotland, so that was an extra tick. Um, and so for us, that's what's been really exciting, really, really exciting. It's such a special place. There's so many amazing stories behind it. We meet people all the time, even in lots of other distilleries, and they go, "Oh, my uncle worked there, and my, granddad worked there, and my this worked there, and then my friend worked there," and they all have such a soft spot for Tormore. And I think what we've tried to work out, we've done a lot of research. We've been lucky because we've met a lot of people who either work there or have the stories. We have a phenomenal archive, because it was quite a late distillery. It was the first Speyside distillery to be built, new distillery to be built in the 20th century, um, which is great. And we got all the archives with it. So, we're going through it and we've got so much amazing information. It's incredible. And the most important thing, David, is that it was built around a community. Yeah. Because it was built in 59, they did so much research. They brought in really clever people. They had a very famous whiskey writer, Neil Gunn. They had one of the most important architects of that time, Sir Ian Richardson, and they had a politician. And they sent these three guys to do research and understand what makes the most amazing and ideal single malt whiskey distillery. And I think two main things, as I said, traditionally, pot stills, fermenters, etc. But the two things they did, one was they put purifiers on the top of the stills to give you extra fruitiness because they wanted a fruity spirit, which is really important to us, really important to us. And that's something I absolutely love, adore, and sort of miss because I think a lot of the traditional single malts, a lot of them have lost that fruit. They're more cereally and they're designed to take a bit more sherry or be heavier and richer because they believe the consumer likes bigger, richer whiskies. And I completely disagree with that. So that was one. And the second one was need to build a community around the distillery. So you have people who can go to work without having to travel huge distances and you create a happy community. They built a village hall for the community so that they would celebrate, they can, relax, celebrate, do whatever within a local environment and walk across the road to work. But make sure when they come home, they have that community feel. And, it's so transparent that really a happy community makes good whiskey. Simple. When you go into a distillery and you feel this energy, everyone's happy, everyone's alive, there's just something there. And as long as the processes are correct, everything should fall into place.
I love it. And to note, just to jump back for a second, the different mash tuns and washbacks that are needed, being in so many different locations, the actual floor above the boiler, the clock tower. I heard both Polly Logan, distillery manager for Tormore, and as you said, Ollie Chilton, both talking about how they have something like 6 different temperature entry setups for where the whiskey is going to be started. I mean, it's complexity to start with, but they make it work.
Yeah.
Ollie in particular, he says he regularly notes, pears, autumnal fruits, a rich texture, and peppery spice as that heart of Tormore. And it sounds like that's, I would assume you and he would be aligned on that anyway, but it sounds like that's what you're describing too.
Yeah. We get, I think typically we're calling our house style peaches and pears. That's what it is, with a hint of walnut skin at the end. So it's got this lovely, elegant dryness, but it's fruit. It's a fruit spirit. And, since we purchased the distillery, David, all we wanted to do was refine that fruitiness. So again, we did what they used to do in the old days. Yeah. Which first we looked at our barley variety to make sure what barley creates the most fruitiest character for our environment. Second, we looked at fermentation, yeast. Yeah. So we now use 2 types of yeast, brewer's yeast and distiller's yeast. And we've done extended fermentation and we're adapting slowly to see what the optimum is to give us, a balance without changing the house style. Um, and a little bit of play about on the cut points. And what we've got is just a richer, fruitier, more textural spirit. We love Tormore. We just wanted to make it, as I said, richer and fruitier. And that will come.
It might be a little bit difficult to find now just because there wasn't a lot of it, but there is the Tormore Blueprint series, which I was fortunate to try first through the Drammers Club here in New York, and then later on, I loved it so much that I purchased a few bottles from First Fill Spirits in New York. I always love giving them a shout out because they're one of the few places that will get bottles that are otherwise hard to find. And these three releases were all 10 years old, all bottled at 48%, 96 proof. And you have the ex-bourbon cask, toasted oak, and cream sherry. The latter two being finishes, and the bourbon being, its full maturation. And I'll post tasting notes for it when I post this episode, but I wanted to note, all three were enjoyable, but I think the ex-bourbon cask was just the purest expression of it. And I feel like in listening to interviews you've done and just talking to you now, that's kind of where you lean towards, is let the spirit shine and don't hide it too much.
I think, yeah. So what's important to us is nurturing the spirit we have. Yeah, we don't want to mask it. We don't want to overpower it with wood. In the old days, wood was a mellowing vessel. That's the way I've always looked at wood. Yes, sherry bombs can be great. When they work, they're amazing. So I'm not opposed to them. Don't get me wrong.
Black Bowmore has a particular place in your history. So
Springbanks, old Springbanks, so just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal in sherry. But you need a weightier spirit. Old Macallan. But you need a weightier spirit. So yes, our spirit shines more in definitely American oak, but more bourbon. I think it does work with sherry. It'll take us a little bit of time to get there because when we purchased the distillery, we had no sherry. There was zero sherry cask. So we have started this sherry cask regime. We had to learn, we had to play about to ensure and see what works with our spirit type. And we're in a really good place. We're very happy. I think what we were showing, I think with the Blueprint series, they were, as you say, two of them were finishes, but they were very gentle finishes. Yeah. So we're currently playing about with both bourbon and sherry. With sherry, we are using what I would classify as a softer style of sherry. So, with the new style of sherry casks, they're very heavily toasted, charred, etc. You understand? To give you that color and immense flavor, that doesn't work for us. You with me? We're more on the lighter, medium side so that it's not overpowering. We want the sherry flavors. We don't need the color. Okay. So that's how we're trying to temper our whiskey and sherry. Also, we're using a mixture of seasoned casks, which is now traditional in the industry. I would say 98% of what everybody is using is seasoned casks. But we've also managed to come up with a lovely regime of buying, well, basically filling even casks with sherry bodegas, small sherry bodegas, and leaving them until they're ready, and then using them. Yeah, and that the liquid that comes out of them is real sherry and being used for sherry bottlings. Yeah, as sherry bottlings. And that's taken us a long time to get to know. We've been working on that for a while for our own, third party bottlings. We just wanted to understand and nurture, and I wouldn't say master, but really get to that part of understanding what is different with the old sherry cask versus why the change and why is everything today just purely furniture polish and nothing else. So it's taken us a long time, but as I said, we're in a good place. We're really happy. And we're just using that softer style of sherry. We are using a little bit of European as well because it has its place. And for us, I'm calling it blending component to make our final single malt, a little bit of that is wonderful, can be wonderful. So in our new core range, so what we're doing is we have our entry level, which is a no age called Timeless, Tormore Timeless, because what we believe is we have an elegant, timeless spirit. It's bottled at 43%, minimal filtration, and it's predominantly bourbon. It's about 98% bourbon with a touch of cream sherry, just to give us a little bit of mid-weight. Our 12-year-old is a mixture of bourbon, cream sherry casks, and a little bit of toasted white oak. Yeah, American toasted white oak. And then our 16-year-old is called sherry cask. At the moment, yes, it is sherry finished. So it's approximately 3 years, 2.5, 3 years in sherry. As I said, on the softer style of sherry, so you can still taste all the fruit. And over time, of course, the longer we have stock, it'll become slightly richer and richer and richer over time. But we're very happy with the profiles. We still need a little time just to get everything, ironed out, because it's our first bottlings happening soon. But we've got some other interesting, exciting stuff to come. So we're looking at, what type of wood would complement our spirit, and that's what we're sort of working.
So I'm just making a clip here, and I'll cut this question out. But I want to be respectful of your time.
No, I'm free. Don't worry. I've got all the time for you.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right. I won't go too super long, but I want to obviously
sure.
Speak to Portintruan and a couple of other things as well. So thank you. So part of the deal, if you will, when the Whisky Exchange gets sold to Pernod Ricard, and you get Tormore Distillery as part of this. Part of the deal, as I understand it, is that for at least 3 years, Tormore would still be producing for what would eventually, I guess, go mostly into Chivas blends. So is that, I mean, and it wasn't a small amount. It was, around 2.5 million liters LPAs. The majority of what was being produced at Tormore, which I know you said was 5 million-ish capacity, but I think like 3.2 to 3.5 was really being produced. So I guess my question there is, 3 years has elapsed. Are you still producing for them at this point?
No. So yeah, just from the beginning. So Tormore was a separate deal to Whisky Exchange. It was sort of, we were talking at the same time, but we sold Whisky Exchange first, and a year later we purchased Tormore. And then you're right. So yeah, they had agreed a deal with us because really they didn't want to sell it, but they were kind enough to do so. And as part of that, because they were looking at expanding some of their other production facilities where they could then readapt the liquid they were making at Tormore into their new facility somewhere else. So they needed 3 years to do that. So that's what the deal was. And that finished as of December 2025. So we are currently we're just producing currently 1 million liters a year. We are talking to a number of people to see if they would like some bulk spirit for blends, etc. So that's conversation at the moment. Nothing's been committed. As you can understand, it's quite a complicated and difficult time. So, but there are some interesting companies out there who are looking for, to work with. I think family-owned businesses, but they want to have long-term commitments. They want to ensure that, this is not, you haven't bought this distillery to build it and sell it. You're in it for the long haul. So they have security, which for us, we definitely have. Because if we hadn't, we would have released liquid a day after buying the distillery and not waited 3.5 years.
I mean, number one, you answered one of the follow-up questions, which was, if you weren't producing anymore for Chivas at this point, sorry, for Pernod, but I'm using them interchangeably for this. That's a lot of capacity and a lot of production to be like, okay, well, where does this go now? So in pulling back to the 1 million-ish liters right now, that's one question answered. And in talking to other companies too, that's another question as well. Because I was thinking it's one thing if we're talking about just throwing an arbitrary number out there, 10,000 liters. handful of casks or even a couple dozen casks that need to go somewhere, you're talking 2.5 million liters. Very different conversation. So, that does answer that. But also, as you said, you're doing this for the long haul. You didn't release whiskeys really before now. And for the quote-unquote new Tormore, so the Elixir Spirits age of Tormore, your first whiskey that you guys ran off the stills is coming of age. It just came of age in October of last year, so October 2025. And to be clear, this is whiskey you're not necessarily going to release, but it's spirit that can be called whiskey because it's 3 years old. Your stated plan is to, like you said, is start with a core range and really establish this brand identity and brand awareness. Have a couple special editions, sure. Some limited editions still potentially sell to independent bottlers, but really develop Tormore as a brand in a way that arguably it never has been before. Does that mindset still hold true, particularly in the current whiskey environment?
I wouldn't say in a way that hasn't been done before, because I think that's how it used to be done. Makes sense? I think where I think things have changed. Look, whiskey for me was built on liquid to lips. Yeah, that's what I strongly believe. And I know that because, that's the reason we started the whiskey show, because people would, just as more and more brands became available, it became more and more confusing. Already there was whatever 50, 60, 100 different single malts, and then suddenly, you've got world whiskies, you've got 20 different expressions from every single brand or every single distillery. And it just became such a confusing thing. And I think today is even more confusing. And the thing is, then some of the brands just got lost a little bit, and they're like, well, our brand is not working, so that means we're doing something wrong. So what we need to do is innovate. Yeah. So let's do all these wine finishes and different cask finishes and have a big range, and that will make it all right. And then we work, excuse me, sorry. Yeah. And then it'll make it all right. But it's definitely not the case. And I think I just want to go back to the basics. We believe in our liquid, and I think it's just explaining to people this is, I wouldn't say an old style of liquid, but it was reminiscent in terms of a lot of the whiskeys in the old days were fruit led. Yeah, they were much fruitier, and that's been lost for me. And as I said, a lot of whiskeys are just too sherry, way too sherry. I grew up on sherry cask whiskey. I know what a good sherry cask whiskey tastes like. And there's not many brands that I love or respect today which are doing sherry cask. And I feel half those brands are better in bourbon anyway. So I don't know why they've gone down the other route. So I think, there's a new type of consumer as well who's just grown up on this newer style. So I think the only way you can educate them is not by posting pretty pictures, is actually getting liquid to lips. So that's what we want to do. We want to go back to the old days of doing things. We believe in our liquid. And I think there's not many single malts on the market today which are more on that fruity, elegant style. I really don't.
And as kind of a last question on Tormore, because there are a number of other things that I'll include in the write-up to be sure to just include, but you mentioned that one of the changes, one of the differences from the production with Pernod versus what you're doing now is for your own spirit, you're doing the mix of distillers and brewers yeast, this ale yeast and Maori pinnacle yeast. Slightly older, still fairly recent, but slightly older style as opposed to, I think, the MG Plus that they were using before. Now, quoting Ollie, I mean, he was wondering about the peppery note in particular. Behind all these fruity notes and the autumnal and orchard fruits, like you said, pear and peaches, There is this kind of gentle pepperiness that I get. I know the folks over at One Nation Under Whiskey and Single Cask Nation got this too. And Ollie had asked Alan Winchester about it. And Alan believed that the peppery note was a result of the mashing that Tormore had for many years until maybe 97 used spent yeast. Was there, I know you said you're still playing around with things like fermentation, cut points, to see what works best for this. Have you explored using spent yeast?
Used which yeast?
Spent yeast.
Absolutely. The problem is, David, it's not really possible to get in big quantities. You can get no brewer in Scotland can give us that much spent yeast. That's the problem. They genuinely can't. Yeah, we looked at this in a lot of detail, and it just doesn't work. So I think for me, the thing that I get from brewer's yeast more so, which is what I was personally looking for, is that extra textural element. It's just much more rich and mouth coating. Yeah, and that's something which I love. I think it also can give you a slightly richer fruitiness. Yeah, I always go back to Ben Nevis. I think Ben Nevis, a lot of people are in love with. One of the reasons is because they were using brewer's yeast, or sorry, a combination of brewers and distillers. But traditionally, a lot of distilleries did. Most of the distilleries did in the old days. And they, a lot of them, yes, you're right, you spent yeast. But I think it's too difficult to get. I think we will probably experiment more with that on Islay, where we have a capability to do small batches. So I'm more keen to try it there than I think play about with the Tormore. But to be fair, because we have the capacity, as you know, we have some ideas, because what else do we do? So we do have an idea to do maybe a couple of other interesting things and maybe produce another style of spirit as well, which will again help us creating different products and bits and pieces. So let's see. They're early at the moment for us.
Sure. Fair.
Too many projects.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's a great segue to the next, which is on Islay, Portintruan.
Sure.
So whereas, as you've said, Tormore was built for single malts. There's not a ton of flexibility to create other spirits. Your new distillery being built has a lot more. It's purpose built for that flexibility, and we'll get a little more into that. So this is the 11th distillery on Islay. It's on the road between Port Ellen and Ardbeg. It's not small either. So, this is an idea that has been percolating since 2013, 2014. I think it came out of originally a conversation at Edinburgh Airport. And now, as we're talking in May of 26, you're on the cusp of running your own spirit on there. Is there a relief to being this close, or is the tension still high?
I think, look, it's been so long, we're all going with the flow. Yeah. I think probably a few years ago, we realized we better stop putting dates in, etc. Because if this was the mainland, it would have been a lot simpler to do, I think is the way to put it, because you have so many options for everything. The main thing is the island has very little resource to do what we needed to do. So everything has to be brought in from the mainland, every single element. And unfortunately, because of the complications to getting things to the island, if one thing is delayed, it has an impact on another thing, which will have an impact on another thing. So, we've realized that it's just such a rolling craziness that you just have to go with the flow. We used to get upset and so on and so forth with different elements, and it's like, there's no point. So I think when you've got people who live on the island, work on the island, and know the island. They're saying, listen, leave it to us, calm down. You got lots to do. Yeah, we'll just tell us what to do and we'll do it. So we got Georgie Crawford, as you know, our distillery manager. We now got Jackie. We got a great distillery production manager, Fraser, assistant production person, Emma. And they all know the island. They're all locals. They all know the island inside out, and they know what they're doing. Yeah, much more than I do. Let's put it that way. I just know what I want. Yeah, and sort of how we do it. And I need them to help me achieve that dream and vision. But make sure I don't go too far because I do get a bit crazy sometimes. Um, so yeah, it is what it is. So we go with the flow.
I know some of this has changed, of course, due to COVID, but also departure from the Whisky Exchange. In that you said early on you didn't have a ton of time to devote to this because Whisky Exchange and the shows took up so much of your time. But in the last couple of years, I mean, you still got a lot of projects going on, as we've been talking about. But I like this idea that you've got the team in place, you hired the people that know the island, know the sense of place there, and can execute what you're trying to do. In mentioning the flexibility, I think what I was meaning is that in addition to, as Ali has said, a number of spirits that you can produce there, you can produce rum, you can do gin, but I've heard you don't really want to do gin, but different spirits, you can do grain whiskey there. What I was really thinking about was the styles that you can produce. So rather than just having a single one, it's about you can produce a light versus heavy peat, super fruity, rich and oily, based on a couple of different changes. And I know you haven't run the spirits yet, so this might be getting the cart ahead of the horse. But do you have an idea of kind of the balance that you want to strike between these types of spirit when you do start producing?
Yeah, I think we do, but I think also I'm trying to be very sensible and level-headed in terms of sometimes you can't get exactly what you want. I think there's also the element of, I call them micro factors, microclimate around the distillery. Those that, there are certain things which just work better in a certain environment. So I think we will go with the flow. We will try and make tweaks and changes for each type of spirit style we want until we get to a place that we're all happy with. I think is the way to put it. You with me? Um, it, and sometimes, it might not be quite there, and sometimes, hopefully, it'll be much better than we expected. So we've got to play about, you know. Remember, some of those small changes by just changing the yeast type may make a huge difference to that particular style type. So it's not one yeast fits all or one thing fits all. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that, and that's what we've got to learn. And as I said, I think the other thing which I'm of a strong belief of is the spirit will never be right or 100% correct for the first 5 years. Because you might look at a spirit style and say, I really like that, but you actually don't know how it's going to age. Are you with me? Yeah. So for me, what I've got in my mind is we're going to age it. We're going to try it after 6 months, 1 year. And then when you realize the direction it's going, you can say, actually, I need to make a tweak. Then you have to wait another 2, 3 years for that tweak, if you see what I mean. We can agree on something and say we really like that and we're going to go for that and not make any tweaks. But I'm being honest. I feel we will always find something to improve. We'll find and say I like that, but I'm missing this or I'm missing that, and it's a learning curve. It's something that's going to take us time. We just got to work as a team. Everyone's taste is also, of course, palate is slightly different. And I'm quite sort of open now that, I might like one style, but I've got to think of a wider audience as well. It's got to work for everyone. But I think having these, 4 different styles, the way I look at them, they're just blending components. They're components when I put my single malts together, and you can use if you're missing something in your product, you say, okay, I need a bit of oily, will just help me elevate it, or I need a bit more fruit. And that's what I look at. It's something quite different. But I think it's the right approach. I'm quite excited. But let's see, we might after 5 years say, actually, we only like three spirit styles. We don't need the fourth. Who knows? Yeah, who knows? Or we change it to something else. So there's a lot of learning, a hell of a lot of learning.
And you're doing a few things there that have not been done in Islay in quite some time, or anywhere in much time. So one of them being a massive floor malting. I think it'll be the largest floor malting in Scotland, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I believe we should be able to do, again, we've got to try it, but approximately an equivalent of 750,000 litres of floor maltings. I know that's the minimum we can do, but how much more we can do, time will tell, because we're going to try the depth, how deep is the bed.
Mm.
And it might change that, in the summer it's a slightly different thickness, and the winter is a slightly different thing. So again, this is something of this scale hasn't been done, so there's not many places to learn from. Plus, we're also going down the automated route. We've taken inspiration from a number of things, and then just tried to refine it and improve on it. So there's a lot of learning there as well. But to have done that level in the traditional form, I think would have been really painful.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of monkey shoulders that would be happening if. So the floor malting is one. Another being direct fire stills, which has not been done on Islay for 60 years.
I know.
And these two are two of the three major facets that you've said are important to good classic style whiskey. Floor malting, direct fire, and the third. Why am I blanking on the third now? Oh my goodness. I'm blanking on the third.
Cooling jackets on the line arms.
Yes, thank you. So all of these three being put together, you've said this is a dream of yours to build a distillery from scratch. Most people only get to do it once, so we're going to do it right, or how we feel is right. I'm sure this goes back further than this, but back on WhiskyCast in 2021, you were saying you obviously want Portintruan to have its own distinct character within the kind of generally accepted framework of what Islay whiskey is. Keeping in mind, as we've said, that the spirit has not even run yet, we don't know what exactly is going to be there. What do you see as kind of to put it bluntly, like a market space, a hole in the market where another profile can fit?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, I feel a lot of Islay whiskies have changed. Yeah, and a lot of them have lost the fruit. I think Ardbeg still has a fruit, and I think Kalila still has fruit. Bowmore's come back, but some of the other big boys have lost it completely. So I think it's getting the balance between everything. I don't want to mention too many names, but a lot of brands have really changed, really, really changed. I think it's getting, the right type of peatiness. There's a lot of experiments we can do, David. It's like, where does a peat come from? Is it top car? Is it medium car? Is it low car? There's all these experiments we can do and play about with and learn from. And maybe, one style will suit one type of spirit and the other style will suit another type of spirit. So I think, look, we have to find a path. And yeah, I say I'm very mindful. There are, lots of different types of consumers. Okay, I've come from a generation where we've done it. We've seen the old style of products, and we have a love and affinity to them. And I'm taking inspiration to say, how close can I get? Can I replicate that? Absolutely not. Can I get, a flavor style reminiscent of that? Possibly yes. Because too many factors have changed to say we can replicate it. I don't think you can. the wood, the barley varieties, so many factors. But I think, we're doing everything in our power to create flavor. I think that's the way I look at it. We eat for flavor, we go to good restaurants, why? For flavor. And I think it should be the same in our drink, in our single malt. You should be able to choose and say, okay, we've got all these brands, I like this. You know, we've got a long time to wait, David, because it's not fair comparing a 5-year-old single malt with a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old single malt. So
Sure.
you understand? It's going to take us a long time before we can, I wouldn't say fight the big boys, but be alongside the big boys. In the interim, we have to create something nice and drinkable and enjoyable with character. If you go back, I'm falling more and more in love with whiskies where they were more in refill wood rather than big bourbon, big sherry. And because you just taste the spirit character and it's just delicious, you know. As I said, wood should be a mellowing vessel just to mellow out this spirit, tone it down and just dampen it so that the spirit characters and all the flavors are still there, but the alcohol bite is sort of mellowed out by the wood. That's what tequila does, with reposado. I like reposado. I don't like añejo because it's too long in wood. But repo is 3 months and it just softens a blanco, a good blanco. In repo is as good as a blanco, you could say. But it's just been mellowed, just gently, a tiny amount of wood. So for me to get to that level, that style, I would love to do. But again, to get refill wood is not easy. You can't just go out and buy refill wood. What you're buying is basically STR casks, which are dead wood, which have been shaved, toasted, whatever, recharred, and there you go. And I think they have their place, but not my favorite, not our favorite. To make good refill wood, you have to use bourbon casks, dump them, then you have a good refill cask. And that takes a hell of a long time to do. A hell of a
Right.
long time to do. You with me? So, we're fortunate because we've got Port Askaig. We fill a lot into bourbon, so we're getting nice refill now. Some of it will continue for a Port Askaig brand, and some of it, hopefully, we can use um, at Portintruan.
And as you said, you're building your own wood management policy in these refill cask
Yeah.
stocks. You mentioned at the Manhattan Whiskey Club event a couple of brands that you're particularly fond of from the bourbon side, but to your point, it's not to throw one out there that won't be a surprise. Jack Daniel's puts a lot of ex-bourbon casks into the market, but you're not looking for the casks that are coming directly from Jack Daniel's or Brown-Forman. You want the refills that have been taken from them, used once, and
Correct.
then.
Correct.
So
just
it's
correct.
Yeah. So it's another, at least let's say half a decade to a decade minimum on average for the turnaround. So in terms of Islay, I know you spoke to Mark at Whiskey Cask about the issues that seem to come up on Islay every time someone wants to build a new distillery. We saw it with Kilchoman. I know you saw it with Portintruan as well, that there's only so many people, there's only so much infrastructure. And I think you had a good point from one of those interviews saying, like, look, the roads are what they are, but the roads are not your responsibility. That's the government's responsibility. So people need to petition for the government to do better about the roads. So, but there are other factors. I mean, the direct fire, there's no natural gas. So you need other biofuels to do there. Despite being an island of about 3,000 people, that can, at Fagil, that will explode. Many, many thousands come to the island, just for that short period of time. And then they leave. But how do you deal with the infrastructure to handle that massive, brief influx of tourism? Islay is also dependent on this tourism and dependent on the distilleries to provide economies and jobs. You told a story of where I think you posted 2 positions and you got something like 80 responses to that. So there's this balance that is always being met between what is available, what can be done, what needs to be done, and what you want to be done. So just pulling out one example, we said the floor malting is a huge footprint. It's not going to be a small distillery, so that's going to be a large footprint as well. I know you were still dealing with the question of warehousing. How many warehouses could you build versus warehousing off island on the mainland? Just to pull that out as an example of a challenge you have to face on Islay, is that something that has been kind of figured out already, or is that still in the works of how many warehouses you can have?
No, it's more in the works. I think what we were told initially was that they didn't want warehouses that were too visible. But saying that, since we were told that, Lefroy have extended their warehousing and they're very visible. So, so either the policy has changed, I'm not sure. So yeah, we have to go with the flow. I think, look, we do have land around our distillery, which can be secluded, and we could build more warehousing. We will age part of our stock at Tormore because we have a fully structured warehousing facility there, currently for about 70,000 casks. We're building a new warehouse, so we're going to be up to 80, 90,000 casks equivalent. So you understand, it's good for us, but I think we do want to ensure that we have a good element of warehousing on the island. Your point about roads and infrastructure, I think one thing I'd like to say is one of the reasons we chose the site where we are is purely because we were very close to the ferry terminal with me, so that getting whatever barley on the island, liquid off the island, we were not driving miles and miles and miles away. We were literally, it's on our doorstep. It's a 3-minute drive. That was very, very conscious of that. The rest of it, look, I think a lot of work needs to be done on the island. I feel it upsets me that the government has not really looked after it, invested in it, considering it's such a big revenue driver for them. It's such a small island producing a lot of whiskey, of which a lot is exported. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I'm hoping things will change. In times of need, everyone gets together. It's really good to see there is now some sort of a steering committee, which is led by the SWA, and they're fighting for the ferries and all the transport stuff. And hopefully that'll continue, and they'll pick up on other stuff as well and petition the government on various bits and pieces. Look, we've got a lot to finish off, and then wherever we can help, we will try and help and just try and support and push and do whatever we can from our side to ensure people are looking and investing in the island. It's such a lovely place. Again, very community led. It's an important place. It's too special. Yes, we've built a big distillery. We were mindful, but I believe we've done it for the right reason. Every place we go, any shop we walk into, any bar we walk into, any hotel we walk into, everyone is so lovely and complimentary. Because I think what they seem to be really proud of is we haven't done something small. We haven't done a tin shed, a cladded building which just looks like a warehouse. They've actually spent a lot of money and built something where hopefully it'll become a destination, bringing people to the island, which is good for the community, you know. So everyone's been amazing, and everyone's been so complimentary. It's honestly, we couldn't be happy and couldn't thank people enough. So it's nice to experience that, because you know, in the beginning, when you're going through the difficult planning issues, you're not sure who's opposing you, if you see what I mean. Yeah. But you realize actually the locals, I don't think really opposed it. They were, you know, might have been silent, but they didn't know what to expect, I think is the way to put it. You know, and now that they've seen it, they've heard from people who've been inside, they've heard from people who are working there, and I think there seems to be a nice buzz on the island. You know, I think it's something they can be proud of. You know, because it's different, it's big, it's different, it's a monument of some sort. And you know, we've had a couple of, I believe, on the island, there's been a couple of um, political leaders or whatever, the people from the ministry, etc., who've like, wow, that someone has invested so much, you know, in this little island and done it properly. So we've had a lot of really good feedback that way as well, which makes us really proud and happy.
Excellent. So I will definitely be sure to have you back on in a couple of years when Portintruan starts. Well, even maybe sooner than that, but I'm really excited to see it. It took a little while for me to appreciate Islay whiskey. I think you indicated that earlier, that it takes most people that, unless they are starting with Ardbeg or Laphroaig. But I've definitely gotten more of an appreciation for the flavors behind the smoke. As you said, for Ardbeg, for example, my recent retastings were maybe 5 years past my last ones. This time I was able to get the fruit, where the last time all I could taste was char and peat and smoke. So, yeah. And this is a significantly peaty whiskey, so I'm really excited to see what you guys are producing there. So before closing out, I have a couple of questions about looking forward, and I want to also just say out loud, I appreciate Sukhinder. This is going to be a longer episode. We're going over time. So he's been very generous with his time today with me. In 2022, you had done an interview with the Dealmaker podcast. This was, I think, right after Pernod had purchased the Whisky Exchange, but you were still working there during the transition period. You said that at the time, Pernod was particularly interested in the high end of the market, of the spirits and whiskey market, and that in your estimation, that market really didn't have an upper limit. And I think we've seen that in prices, especially for the higher end things on auction or on rare bottles, have just continued to rise. Even during this, let's call it a plateauing or a change in drinking habits rather than a downturn or lock, which I agree with you, I don't think it's a lock yet. Do you still feel that the upper market, that higher end market, still doesn't have an upper limit?
I think, David, what I probably underestimated was how much expensive product would be launched. Yeah. I think when you go back, a 50-year-old whiskey was special. Hardly anyone was releasing a 50-year-old whiskey. Today, everybody is releasing a 50-year-old whiskey. And I think I'm being honest, I just didn't expect people had that much stock or were keeping. But I think more importantly, some of the liquid is not brilliant. They're just bottling for the sake they have a 50-year-old. Yeah. That's where I think it goes wrong. And, you know, a lot of consumers, I think somewhere along the way, people lost their way from being a drinkable product to an investable product. You with me? I've never looked at whiskey as an investable product. Never. Of course, I have a collection, and when I'm told what's the value, you look at it and you go, oh, wow, it's appreciated. And of course, I know it's appreciated because I'm in tune with the market. But the thing is, I'm still buying bottles which I need for my collection, and I'm paying way over the odds for them. what I necessarily think they're worth. And I'm only doing that because I need that bottle and I believe it's an important bottle for my collection. If I was looking at it as an investment, I would never buy it because I think it's too expensive or I've overpaid. You with me? So I think that's where gone wrong. I mean, a simple example, again, I don't want to mention brands, but you've got a brand who's launched a 50-year-old, then they've launched a 52, then they've launched a 54, and there's still the 50 and the 52 on the market, and they still can't sell it. And then you've got another distiller launching, again, similar, 5 different 50-year-olds, yeah, or in that ballpark. And there's stocks of all of them in the market. You don't do that. You've got to wait for things to sell out. But the problem is they've all been working on building stocks of 50-year-old plus whiskies. And I believe in everybody's plan today, there is, we have to keep a lot of 40-year-old back to make sure it reaches 50. And it's just, I guess the specialness of having a 50-year-old whiskey for me is lost a little bit, because everyone's launching it. Gordon MacPhail are launching 85-year-old whiskies, for God's sake. Yeah, forget 50. So I think that now there should be that more so than ever balance between price and quality. Okay, when I look at some 50-year-old whiskies, I am going to mention a name because I think they've done an honest job and a superb job. Glen Glasgow have launched a 50-year-old, and in the UK, it's under £10,000 a bottle as a proprietary malt, and I think it's absolutely delicious. Yeah.
For people watching the video, my face kind of let that off. I know on paper that sounds like an incredible amount of money. It is, but comparatively, it's not.
About half price to the next comparable. Yeah. It really is. I think the next comparable is 18,000. Then you've got 20, 25, 30, 40. So do you see what I mean? It's lost its way. I think when you look at 12-year-olds, the difference is not that bad. 25-year-old is getting broader. You've still got Glenfarclas, which is so reasonable, and you've got Macallan on the other spectrum, which is 10 times the price. Nothing seems to make sense to me anymore. So I think the industry has lost its way a little bit. And when demand was there, people were buying. Brands said, let's just carry on and push it as much as we can. By the looks of things, they've pushed it a bit too much. So I think from a consumer's point of view, it's that balance between quality versus price. I always look at, nothing excites me anymore and hasn't done for the last 10 years. I always look at everything, quite judgmentally to say, great, looks great, price, okay, what does it taste like? And then I will make my mind up. And I think, some 50, 52, 54, they're hitting 40,000, 50,000. I think that's just now a bit too much. And some of those bottles are now selling at auction for half price. Yeah, and I think that answers the question.
Yeah. This is, I think, unavoidably a morbid question, but for someone who does have a museum collection, some people have sold theirs in later years to become literal museums, or donated them. What do you hope comes of your museum collection?
Not sure. I think, look, it's currently not on display because I do not have a large boardroom anymore. I have a very small one, and I have about 700 bottles on display now. I think with us doing so much in Scotland, I think really our vision and dream is to take the collection back home to Scotland and display it in Scotland. Yeah. So it's something which is in the back of our mind. Once we finish Islay, once we sort of launch Tormore, and once we sort of hopefully get a visitor center at Tormore, which is the next big project. How long it'll take us, I don't know. Um, it depends how much stock I sell, I guess. Um, we can then look at that, and I think that for us is really important. And then alongside that, we're going to look at what to do with the collection. Yeah, because I think to share it, thing is, I always had it on display in my office for the last 15 years. And used to look at it every day. We had meetings every day in the boardroom. Just nice, it's important. I think having it just packed up, locked up doesn't make sense, and I miss it a lot. So that's really the dream.
Okay. And circling back to, you did a great interview, I think earlier this year with 88 Bamboo, and I took a lot of inspiration for this interview from it. One of the questions I usually ask is about legacy. And in both that interview and at the Manhattan Whiskey Club event, you said you want your legacy to be, inspiring the next generation, keeping fun in whiskey or bringing fun back to whiskey, and to increase that thought presence to think like independent bottlers and independent distilleries to make whiskey for the right reasons. People have asked you over the years, about those you admire. You've thrown out certainly, Richard Patterson, White Mackay, of Jim Beveridge, formerly now retired, formerly of Diageo, and Johnny Walker. Still one of the most perfect names for this industry. I'm curious, when it comes to specifically that concept of keeping or bringing back fun in whiskey, who do you look to as someone who's done a really good job of doing that?
I think a lot of the brands in the old days did that. I really do think so. I mean, you could argue that Bill Lumsden, in his own way, giving a master class was just, fun in its own way. Bit of tongue in cheek, a bit of dry sense of humor, but he was really funny. Richard Patterson, in the old days, the legend, Jim McEwen. Jim McEwen inspired so many people. He inspired me. John Glazer, Compass Box, completely reinvented the wheel with blended malts and grain. There's so many people. There really are. I think because I've seen it all from the beginning, some of this won't mean much to people. But, you had Dr. Nick Morgan, who did so much for the single malt whiskey industry in United Distillers das Diageo, but he was not really in the fore. He was always in the back and just working his way, pushing for single malts, inspiring up and coming journalists and writers to, this is how you should look at it. I think what, for me, slightly gone wrong in whiskey is because there is just too much product on the market. A lot of the writers and influencers can't keep up. I can't keep up. They can't keep up. So for them, it's more like, next, please. Let's sample after sample after sample. And I don't think anyone is giving those samples enough time or love or respect to understand which of those whiskeys is actually really special for today's day and age. Yeah. And which of those whiskeys are the old and rare of the future. You with me? What they're looking at is, this is just another whiskey from X. It's really nice, but we've got lots more coming, so I'm not buying anymore. I'm just going to buy a bottle and that's it. And people are missing some really amazing liquid out there. So I think for me, that's where the fun sort of coming back. It's just become too, you know what I mean, too crazy. It really has. It's difficult, I think just looking at whiskey in an honest way and just sitting down, enjoying, drinking the company, getting prices, I think, a bit more sensible. And I'm finding prices are coming down. I think a few independent bottlers are being a bit more sensible. That's really good. So I think really that it's a difficult question to answer. But there were so many people who just did it in the right way. So many.
And for one last question, you said that one regret that you have or had is not working for a company on the production side. Now that you have, let's say, 2 distilleries in your portfolio, any desire to get down on the production floors and check off that last box?
I think there's people who can do it better than me. I think I just want to taste the liquid and tell them what I want and, help tweak it. Thing is, my way of looking at whiskey is so different because I've seen it from the beginning. I've seen what used to be done, but I was always used to looking at it purely in terms of liquid, liquid, liquid. Then at some point I changed and looked at it as liquid and why it tasted the way it was and asked questions and learned from that. And I've spoken to some really amazing people in the industry who were either in production and now have gone into research. Yeah, and some of them are very quiet and not even very well known, and they're just lovely, humble people. And for me, that's been really interesting. I think it's observing. It's definitely trying everything to understand. But do I really want to become a production person and liquid? I don't think so. I think there's good people. I trust my team implicitly. I think for me, it's just I think I could probably do a better job, hopefully inspiring, spreading the word, talking about our product, helping the sales team and working with my distributors. Because for us, look, we're a family-owned business, and we want to work with distributors that have the same ethos, even if they're a big company, but they just have nice people working for them who care. Because I really want to sort of start from the bottom up. I think somewhere along the lines, 10 years ago, things just got a bit lost and everyone started innovating. I look at some single malt brands, their core product is 10 times better than all their limited editions. Yeah. And you're thinking, why are you not pushing that? It's damn good. Because if you can't get the basics right, I don't know why you think there's something wrong with the liquid because people don't buy it. I think it's more a case of people don't know your liquid or your brand. Do you see my point? I like to look at things really simply. I really do. I remember Highland Park. I had a conversation with Highland Park. This is going back maybe 20 years ago. And they go, Skinner, we're looking at Highland Park and we want to really push hard and we're doing all these advertising and these seminars. No, it's mainly advertising, all this advertising. And he goes, it's just not growing as a brand. And I go to them, I go, guys, you're missing the basics. I go, you have some of the best liquid in Scotland. And in those days, Highland Park was amazing. And I go, you know what? Even though you're such an old brand, believe it or not, people don't know Highland Park that well. So just do liquid to lips. Just get it out there. Let people try it. Then they hired this amazing guy, yeah, who worked and he's traveled and did class after class. And honestly, you saw the brand just go. It really moved. And it was just, they were overthinking it. So I'm a very to a certain extent a bit of a traditionalist, and I said I think a lot of the new consumers who have come in the last 5 to 10 years, if they've learnt it the wrong way. I genuinely believe so because they've learnt it with all these crazy wood finishes, and they're looking for extreme flavors. And it's fine. Some of them it'll work for them, but I think they've not experienced a different style of purity, cleanliness, to a certain extent, as I say, older style whiskey.
All right. I love it. Well, Sukhinder, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you on to talk through your philosophies, talk through the projects that you're working on now. Hang out with me for just a minute or two afterwards to close out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. There will be links in the show notes to where you can follow all the projects that are involved with Sukhinder, with Elixir Spirits, including a few that we didn't even mention or get to talk to, like Elixir Trails. And please do read these show notes. They're going to be extra long, of course, but extra interesting, throwing in a bunch of questions and tidbits that we didn't get to today on the show. Thank you for listening. Share, like, rate, and subscribe. And I'll see you all next week.
Thank you, David.